Thanks a lot, Mika. And thanks everyone for having me, this very far away place. So a few years ago, I started a PhD researching the evolution of collective intelligence in humans. So I was really obsessed with this one question, which was, why is it that humans, as far as we know, are the only species that's getting collectively more and more intelligent over time? So with every generation, we're able to do things that are more complex than the previous generation. And so naturally, I was sent to Texas and ended up working with chimpanzees, teaching them to use touchscreens to sort of try and get to the bottom of this. And it's sort of the question that I was asking. Every night when I went home from the primate center, I'd open my computer and I'd see all this evidence of things going seriously wrong in the world. So things like ecosystem collapse, without out of control extractive economy on a global scale, income inequality just going through the roof everywhere you look. And my initial research question was pushed out by a much more urgent question, which is, how is it that if we're getting so much smarter all the time, how is it that our biggest institutions are just behaving in a way that's less and less intelligent, and so unintelligent that it's putting the future of the planet and everyone on it at risk? So the internet has been heralded for decades now as a potentially transformative force. And in terms of accumulating knowledge and making communication instantaneous and accessible, connecting people more than they've ever been connected, it really does have that potential. When you see things like Wikipedia, which we take for granted every day, where a group of people have set out to make the sum total of all human knowledge accessible to anyone, anywhere. And they're doing it, and it's amazing. So that brings up another question, which is, if this is the case, why has the internet not helped in terms of, our largest institutions behaving in a severely unintelligent way that's putting everything at risk? Well, at the moment, so the internet feels like this sort of immensely powerful but disembodied brain. You hear this metaphor a lot about the internet being like this distributed global brain. And at the moment, it feels like it's sort of floating off somewhere in space, disconnected from the distributed global body, or like the limbs in the physical world that are deeply impacting on our environment. So that's where the big institutions come in. So the things that really affect our ecology and our living conditions on a huge scale, these are things without a brain. These are huge institutions driven by self-interest, without anyone really at the helm. Just driven by these processes that we've put in place over decades, and totally disconnected from this amazing wealth of collective intelligence that's increasing exponentially. So in 2011, something really interesting started happening. I'd been sitting in Texas, getting so disillusioned with the slow pace of academic research, translating into real-world impact, that I started feeling more and more guilt, and started feeling irresponsible for pouring my life into this academic pursuit that was interesting, but just felt so slow compared to the urgency of the problems we're facing. So I came back to New Zealand, and I got involved in grassroots community organizing and social justice activism. I just felt this real need to connect with real people in real communities. And then in 2011, largely through social media, I'm sort of seeing, as many people in this room would have experienced, seeing these images flooding through of a new kind of social movement, a social movement that looked distinctively different to anything I'd seen before. So starting in Tunisia in January 2011, and then spreading through the Arab Spring protests in Egypt, and then the Indignados and 15M movements in Latin America and Spain, and then the Occupy movement in Wall Street, starting in Wall Street, and then spreading to literally hundreds of cities around the world, even as far away as New Zealand. So this felt to me, and I'm sure to many other people here, like the first time the internet had spoken out into the real world. The first time this sort of massive interconnection had led people in really large numbers to get out on the streets. And so if this is the first time the internet has really spoken, What do you think its first word was? So the internet, more than anything else that we've seen in the last few years, has provided this massive infrastructure, immensely powerful for mobilizing huge numbers of people to come together and all say no at once. But then what happens? So we're left with this situation, this vacuum. Once the oppressive regime has been deposed, once the petition has been successful, once something's been taken away, when you're mobilized in opposition to something, how do you then transition to sustained, constructive, collective action? So how do we get from this situation to this situation? How do we get from the angry infant that doesn't say yes until they're 6 months further down the track? And how do we sort of take this mass of information that we're all exchanging at an ever-increasing pace and translate it into constructive, generative, shared action? So that's what a bunch of us in Wellington, so a bunch of technologists, open source developers, facilitators, and activists have been working on for the last 18 to 24 months. So we came out of this experience of collective decision-making on a large scale, and knowing that this was happening in cities all over the world, on every continent, that people who had never met were coming together, were talking, they were deliberating, they were organizing in a directly democratic way where every voice could be heard, where diverse perspectives could contribute to a process that would lead groups to come to better outcomes than any individual would by themselves. And seeing the power of that process and the potential on a really large scale for it to have a transformative effect. But also seeing the flip side of that, seeing just the practical constraints of needing to be in the same place at the same time, seeing what happens to people when they're in meetings for 5 hours and nothing gets decided, or when the loudest voices in the room dominate the discussion, have a disproportionate influence over the decision-making, and over the course of weeks, seeing the disintegration that selection pressure leads to, and seeing the same entrenched power structures emerge from these groups that had an explicit commitment to deep, deliberative, democratic, inclusive process, end up with these emergent, informal, sort of accidental dictatorships. So we felt like we're using the internet to communicate every day. Surely there's a tool out there. Surely there's some way of using that infrastructure to not just talk, but to have discussions that then lead to building of shared understanding and eventually to agreed outcomes that can be implemented. So the platform that we came up with came to be known as Loomio, which is sort of got two elements in the name, the idea of a loom weaving disparate threads together into a coherent whole, and also the illumination that comes from the collective wisdom of a group of people with diverse perspectives feeding together. And so where we're at now is we've got a robust beta prototype that's being used by thousands of groups around the world, and it looks a bit like this. It's a really simple, user-friendly tool that allows groups to have a discussion, so start a discussion on any topic. If the group gets to a point where it makes sense to try and make a decision together, then anyone can put up a proposal. So a good proposal is just a very clear course of action. I think the group should do this. Like in an in-person group that works really well together, you have this flexibility where you can change your position at any time. So if someone makes a compelling point that you hadn't thought of, you can go from disagreeing to agreeing. This has sort of taken the basic protocol, the meme of collective decision-making that was really spread through social media around the Occupy movement and around the other social movements in the wave in 2011, and putting it into the most accessible online environment that we can design. And so when you get to the end of the process, you always have a clear outcome, an actionable, clear outcome. So this is where all of these groups that are currently trying to make decisions through Facebook, trying to make decisions through email, these platforms that were just not built for having that convergence around a shared outcome that works for everyone. And as soon as we had a prototype up and running, it was taken up by just such a diverse range of groups that it ended up being used for things that we could never have anticipated. So one of the first groups to use it on a large scale was the same city council that 12 months previously had been sending us eviction notices to clear us from the city square. So used it for a large-scale public consultation. Just in the last little while, we've had groups set up in a group of community gardens in Bulgaria, a community hospital in Vietnam. We've got Bitcoin mining co-ops using it, right through to groups of 12-year-olds making decisions in their school councils. Something that's appealing to everyone from anarchist collectives through to government departments feels like something that's got a lot of potential for widespread uptake. So we've built this beta version. Over the next 6 months, we'll be bringing it out of beta to a full mobile release. We've just run a crowdfunding campaign that I know some people in this room contributed to, so we're deeply grateful for now having resources to take it through to a full release that can scale. And we're really just driving forward, building with the open source community, something that we see as public infrastructure for distributed group decision-making. Some of the groups that are using it. So where we're at now, I feel, in history, is a really interesting place to be. It's a really hopeful time in some ways, and I think that's what the spirit of this conference really captures, that we've got this infrastructure with more potential for liberation, for interconnection, for genuine, distributed, meaningful democracy. And the same infrastructure is increasingly under threat. We've got this digital commons that's increasingly being enclosed. We've got all these spaces that feel public and really are not. So space that feels like you can freely participate when every single behavior that you perform is being monetized and is being sold to the highest bidder. So the challenge now is to support the ecosystem of tools that are developing, that are held publicly, that are held in the public good, that are purpose-driven, not profit-maximizing. And there are some really amazing tools coming out. So there's a group in Argentina called Democracy OS who have built the first user-friendly platform for liquid democracy, for proxy voting. Really impressive project. I feel like the challenge is really to look at what's already there, this burgeoning sphere of publicly held civic tech infrastructure, and support it and see what we can do to support other projects coming up. Because it's only when we're all participating in meaningful democracy. So democracy as a distributed network of real people in real communities coming together to make decisions that work for everyone. Only then will the public internet have delivered on its real potential. Thank you very much.